Welcome to Punch Keys Podcast. I'm Poppy Minix, your co-host, bringing you blunt talk for the fiction novelist.
And I'm Cascade, your other writerly co-host. If you love to ramble about writing and need a tribe, you found us.
Are you ready? We're uncorking now. Let's talk about punching those keys.
Guess what time it is?
Is it podcast time?
It's totally podcast time. My favorite time of the week.
It's the best.
Oh my goodness. So tonight is really exciting. I guess actually this morning for me, we're doing a little bit different timing today because we have something very special. It's our last interview for season 1.
Yeah.
We are super, super pumped. We have Meredith Ireland here with us. The Jasmine Project is coming out this week. Everyone, you have to check out this book. It is so good.
It's so good. It's a don't get any sleep because you stayed up too long and read the entire thing totally on accident kind of good.
It's a young adult rom-com, highly enjoyable. We're going to talk to Meredith about her process. She's kind of had the dream path, guys. Like everyone who's like, oh, I want to query and have all these agent offers and these big-time publishers and sign more than one book and become a mentor for other writers and have a Twitter account where people actually engage with me and like what I tweet. She has the answers to all of this, or at least she has the experience. I don't know if anyone has the answers to all of this. But we are super, super excited to have you, Meredith. Welcome to Punch Keys.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yay! So let's just dive right in. We talked about how you have gone about this, and it feels like you have the dream path because this book is so good. What has surprised you the most in your journey?
I think that there's a few things, one of which is just how long it took. I kind of feel like you have to tell yourself you're going to be an exception, even when you hear that this whole process takes years. You're like, yeah, but I feel pretty sure I could do it in like 27, 28 days. And then a couple years later, you're still querying or you're still on sub or still revising. So the timeline was probably the biggest surprise. And then probably having to remember what you accomplished, like where you are at, can disappear in the highlight reel of social media with everybody posting, oh, I have a Netflix adaptation, I got this award. All those are great, but then it can also make you feel a little lesser. So it's really good to try to remember where you came from and then how far you've progressed.
Do you have any tips and tricks that help you remember that stuff?
So funny, there was kind of like an author life. And one of the things was write down everything you accomplished in the last 2 years. And to see it actually written out, even though it was on my little like apology notes app on my phone, it was really something to actually see it all written down. And even when it's something just like survived going on sub, survived querying, which I mean, that was years ago, but still survived whatever it was, survived my first panel. It went on there because it was important.
That is important. That's like a life goal for mine. So I think that's really important.
It is.
So it does take a really long time. And I have to ask, was The Jasmine Project the first book that you queried?
No. The first book that I queried was a terrible Hunger Games knockoff that was set underwater. So, yeah, that didn't really go anywhere. But it's a good learning experience. I feel like people have different processes, and one of which is that they write something and they move on to the next thing, and that's how they learn. And then other people can keep revising the same book over and over and over again through the years. It's just a different way to go about the same thing.
Speaking of processes, I also noticed on your blog, you have a blog that's fantastic if anyone wants to check it out. She's really great about talking about what it's like on the other side, an open conversation. But you talk about loving the 7-week draft.
I do.
Okay, yeah, you still love it, huh? Are you a painter or a chiseler?
Painter. I tend to draft skeletal, and then I add in details. I add in setting or whatever else is sort of lacking as I go. And I feel like the 7-week draft process has very concrete goals, and I'm very much like that. Like I like to know that I need to hit whatever it is, 1,700 words or whatever it is a day or a session, and it helps to keep me focused, helps me get off my farm game and actually write when I'm at my desk. So it works.
I get that. I tend to pull up Zombies versus Plants all the time. So I totally understand. How much time do you give yourself for a break after like a full round of 7-week drafting?
I try to make it a month.
Nice.
It's become less doable because I have multiple projects, but I try to give myself a month, and during that time, really read, watch movies I haven't seen, just to refresh the creative well. I think it's really important because I can't read while I'm drafting because I'll wind up changing style or copying style, and then it gets a little messy.
That's smart. How many projects do you have going right now?
So the Jasmine project's done, even though the promotional stuff is still happening. So that one doesn't count. So 3.
That's pretty good. Do you switch in between? Like, are they all in the same stage and go together, or are they all in different stages?
No, they're all at different stages. So I can't work on multiple projects at one time. So I have to space out my internal deadlines to give me, say, 2 weeks to complete this one, to get it sent off, rest for a few more days, then work on the next thing.
Nice. And you have another one coming up pretty close on the heels of Jasmine Project. You have Everyone Hates Kelsey Miller.
Yes, I do. That comes out next fall.
And is that a follow-up to the Jasmine Project?
No, it's totally separate.
Totally separate. Same genre?
Yes. So it is a rom-com. It is enemies to lovers. That's like catnip for me. It's 2 rivals for valedictorian at their super competitive high school, and they go on a overnight road trip to the University of Pennsylvania to try to win back their exes. One got ghosted by his summer girlfriend, and the other one has recently lost her best friend, and they're just kind of trying to get their lives back on track.
Oh, that sounds so cute.
That does. I'm excited for it.
Thank you.
So how was that process? When you already had Jasmine Project picked up, were you querying other things at the same time?
No. So Simon, the way the contracts have worked for me, is that when they buy one book, they have an option, and it's kind of an exclusive thing on your next project that's in the same genre.
Awesome. And they obviously loved it and picked it up.
Yes, they did.
So that's super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and I noticed too on your website, you talked about writing young adult and also adult. Do you have any adult projects coming up?
I wrote adult projects and they didn't sell, so I don't. I actually have a middle grade fantasy that I'm working on and that I'm absolutely loving and hopefully will get picked up. We shall see.
That's awesome.
It is.
And I mean, it's kind of the writer experience when things don't get picked up or things don't go how you feel they're going to go, and it inevitably puts us into this low. How do you combat those lows?
So, I mean, it's really hard. I think part of it is you have to accept that it didn't go the way that you envisioned it going. I have my little sad lamp that I chill out with like all winter long. So that thing helps. And then I just think it's always the same, that you have to, refresh with a good book, with something else that's going to get you sparked and motivated to keep going.
Do you tend to read books specifically in the genre you're trying to re-tap that well on, or do you go outside of the genre for reading?
So inside of the genre. Before I write a new project, I try to pick up a few different books in that particular category and genre just to get in that mood.
That makes sense.
Yep.
I do that a lot too. It's nice to know what's
Me
out
too.
there and going on as well.
Mm-hmm. It's very important.
And it's good too, because as a reader, you start to know what the expectations are for other readers in that genre. And looking at that, are there expectations that you make sure you always hold to when it comes to young adult rom-com?
So I think the biggest thing for me is that rom-com has to be funny. And I feel like a lot of rom-com that I've picked up, adult or YA, is not terribly funny. Like, I think it's become kind of a catch-all for, it has a romance and it's not super heavy, but it's important that it's funny. And it's important that there is, in fact, a happy, for now, or happy ending for the characters. And there usually almost always has to be a bleak moment. That is something that is expected in the romance genre. And I think it's an interesting challenge to make it fresh and new, even when you know how it's going to end.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with romance.
Mm-hmm.
Are there expectations that you like to break?
So I think I like breaking out of kind of the toxic energy. So the toxic male interest and the toxic backstory. There can be darker things that happen to your characters, but having some of these devices as like these character builders, I just don't particularly enjoy.
I like how you handled that in the Jasmine Project quite a bit, because it was very clear how good her life is. And yet there were still anxieties because it's real life and that happens. And it was just handled very well. I enjoyed the way that you handled the family and everything going on. And then some of the people that aren't so good for us in our lives that are toxic, but not necessarily like destroying.
Oh, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
It's fabulous. I love that there's not the big bad person and villain, but also the way that you've introduced the different point of views within the Jasmine Project. I kind of wanted to talk about. It captured me right away. You have chapters, the whole point of view is actually a family chat. It's like a group text, I guess. It's not even, like the sister is reading her phone. It's just straight up the point of view is the family group text. And it was really, really engaging and brilliant. So what gave you the idea for that? And was it challenging?
The ideas for the Jasmine Project were really collaborative with my editor, and she had wanted to have this big family, this big kind of overwhelming family. And so in order to have these different personalities but not have it overwhelm the narrative, group texts were a really good way to go. And plus I feel like we're all always messaging. We're all always on our phones. So it's a good way to, and plus Jasmine doesn't know. So there was, how was I going to get this contest and how it came about into the book when she, who's the narrator, doesn't know what's going on?
It was excellent problem solving.
It worked fantastically. I was really impressed.
Thank you.
There's a lot of times when you're introducing characters, they always talk about, like a unique physical descriptor or something. And when you're doing a group text, all of those options are taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
It's pure character voice. And I thought you did really well with it. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you.
So I also wanted to talk about, I know that you have done Pit Mad and do you pronounce it DV Pit? I always say DV Pit.
Mm-hmm.
Dev Pit. Yeah. So I know that you've been a mentor on both of those, and your mentees have some pretty kick-butt success stories.
They do.
So that's pretty amazing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So one of my writer goals years ago was to be a mentor for Pitch Wars. And I did that as a co-mentor. I jumped on with Cara Leigh Miller, who is an amazing editor. She works for Christian Press, I believe. I just learned so much craft from her through working with, we wound up taking on 2 mentees, which was amazing and hectic all at the same time. But Alexa Martin had intercepted, snapped, and one more. And then she has her 4th book coming out on the same day as the Jasmine Project.
Oh my goodness.
That's Mom's
awesome.
Millions. And then Alyssa has The Speed of Light, which was an Amazon book club pick. So on her release day, she had like 3,000 reviews, which was...
Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a dream come true.
And
Gosh, no
her second book will be out soon. And then I stepped away from Pitch Wars. There was just a lot of like back work went into it that wasn't, just working with the mentee. And I just kind of wanted to get away from that overarching system. So I decided to kind of go out on my own and do one-on-one mentorships to prepare for DV Pit, because I had signed with my agent through DV Pit and kind of it was a giving back type of thing. And since then, let's see, Jasmine has her book coming out 2022, I think. Yeah, she's a 2022. And then my last mentee, I believe maybe on sub, but she signed with Stamola Lit, which reps the Hunger Games. So there you go.
That's awesome. So you've got the credentials to say you know what you're doing. What would you give advice to someone who they finished their first draft and they're like, oh no, what do I do now?
Rest it. I would rest it for a month. During that time, if you haven't already done it, or even if you have, I think I would read 2 or 3 books in that category and genre that have been published within the last 2 years, preferably last year. Because you're going to pick up and read for craft. Like reading for enjoyment and reading for craft are different. You can do both at the same time, but you want to look at how, especially if it's pick a well-received book. Like there are books that are out there that are not as good as some others, but go with something that has been either winning awards or really getting great reviews and see how they did it. What are their characters like? Like what stands out to you? What is making this plot tick? How does this feel real? And how does this feel satisfying? And read for that and then bring it back to your work. And then the other thing is getting critique partners. You have to.
Do you have any recommendations on where to get critique partners?
So this is like a strange little alchemy with critique partners. It's trial and error. You have to go and exchange a few pages because your editing styles may be extremely different. Your turnaround times may be extremely different. It's very much a partnership. And so it can take dozens of times to try to find that core group that you work really well with, that these 3 people maybe. And then if you change categories, you have to find new ones. So I actually am now just exchanging with another writer, and I hope it'll work. It's kind of almost like going back on like a dating scene where you're like, oh, I'm really excited and I hope it's going to work out. But if it doesn't, it's okay. It's not a hard feelings thing. Like you may have spent hours on their first 10 pages and what you get back is, oh, it was good. And that's not a good critique partnership. It is a partnership. So Twitter's a good place, not in general, but it's a good place to find critique partners during the pitch events, especially if you have a ready manuscript and you see something in your genre and you think, oh, that sounds really cool. I would like to read it. You can reply to them and see if they would be interested in exchanging pages. Because if they are in PitMad or DV Pit, they are most likely at the same stage that you are because they are not agented. And that's a really good place to meet other people just by saying, oh, this sounds amazing. If you are interested, no pressure, but if you are interested in exchanging 10 pages, let me know.
That's smart. I've actually never even thought of contacting people, and I've done it, and it makes sense because they're at the same stage, and I've done PitMad and had a great experience, and I was amazed at how awesome the authors are on Twitter, despite all of the,
Oh, yeah.
I'm just going to leave it at that.
We all know what you're talking about or not talking about.
Yeah. But I did want to ask you, what is your best editing tip for someone?
Well, it depends on where you're at. So if you are at the point where you think this is time to query, I'm going to send out, I would, read it, send it PDF to yourself. I don't know why this is, but the minute something hits PDF, it just looks different. Your eye gets kind of accustomed to Word and you'll miss things or whatever you write in Scrivener. Other thing is read it aloud. Those are the really good polishing and editing techniques. For editing in general, it's always exchanging with critique partners. If somebody points out something to you and says it's not working, then it's not. Their solution or why may be wrong, but if something's not reading correctly, then accepting that it's not is probably the biggest help for editing.
That, I think, is fantastic advice. It's like one of my favorite Neil Gaiman quotes. He talks about it too. You get nowhere when you argue with the reader or the critiquer.
No, and you'll get an edit letter and from your agent and from your editor. And you can argue with it if you want. Like, it's always good to just read it and go to sleep. And then you want to argue on your way to bed with it, it's fine. But inevitably, it's right.
That's awesome. And just go to sleep afterwards. That's really good advice.
Yep.
Do not immediately respond.
No, you never respond. You never respond other than being like, oh, thank you, I got it.
Yep.
So Twitter. Let's talk about Twitter.
Okay.
I hadn't even thought of using it to find critique partners. That's awesome. There's amazing events. There's a big writing community on Twitter. Meredith, what is your secret sauce? You have a big following. You have such engaging, fun posts. I actually found you through Twitter and your Twitter account.
Oh.
Yeah, that's how I found you. I found your tweets and I'm like, oh my goodness, she is so funny. She's so real and fun. And that's how I found out about the Jasmine Project. We were looking at picking our guests for season 1, and your name was on my list because I was like, she's got secret sauce. I want to know about it. So what's the secrets to Twitter?
Okay, so a few things, because I did actually think about this a little bit. The first is knowing what you're there for. For me, I am there for LOLs and praise, and that's it. Like, if those two things aren't for me, then I really don't care all that much about what's going on there. And that like links right into having boundaries. You don't have to weigh in on everything if you don't want to. You can just go in, post your thing, and then leave. Like, that's all acceptable, and not getting like Twitter spiral of doom, not getting involved in that, because that is very easy to happen. The other thing would be 2 or 3 years ago is when my account started taking off, if you want to call it that. I don't know. Started getting a lot more followers, was because I kind of stopped caring. I was just like, okay, I'm not going to try to be anything other than just me. Because people have a weird way. It's just some graphics, an app, and yet people have a weird way of knowing when you're being real and when you're not. It's a very interesting little phenomenon. But, you want to be honest. For me, it was just easier to be funny, I guess. And that you find your thing, like whatever your thing is, and then you kind of lean into it. And I think that's the best way to go about Twitter.
And I mean, your following is really big, and Jasmine Project just comes out this week, and you don't even use hashtags in most of your tweets.
No,
I don't even notice that. Poppy pointed that out. You just went on and were honest. That was it.
That was it.
Well, honesty is awesome.
I guess that there's a certain amount of like branding, which means that you're trimming down what you would regularly tweet about to try to hit more of what people are following you for. So for me, it's usually stuff that's either reading or writing and the tangential items around that. And so I do try now at this point, I guess, to tweet about that fairly regularly, but you also get whatever weird thoughts in my head too.
I really enjoy the weird thoughts.
I know it.
Like, you get me looking at my mom's shoes and calling them like pilgrim wear and calling them like the Mayflower 1620s. You also get that too.
That goes back to that real aspect too, though.
It does. And, my family does not find me funny whatsoever. So it's nice that Twitter does.
That's all right. You've got Twitter. They think you're funny.
They do. It's good serotonin.
So your Twitter account, you said, was a couple years back that it really started doing better.
Mm-hmm.
You've been querying for a couple years before Jasmine Project, or at least a book beforehand.
Yes.
You've been doing all of this for a while. Is there something you feel you did in the beginning of this process that's made a difference now?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's reading recent books. You have to do it. You have to know your market. You have to know what's out there. And especially when you're talking about kidlit, where it's going. It is going very different places in the last, say, 2 to 3 years that it went in the decade before that. Like, if you're still saying The Outsiders, it's a classic, but that should not be the last YA that you read.
That's great advice. I think the industry as a whole is really starting to go through some changes, and staying up on it and reading relevant things makes a big difference.
It does.
So reading, we read, and you read. So give us some book recommendations, a craft book and a pleasure book.
So the one, because I'm working on a middle grade contemporary fantasy, the one that I just read for craft, which has won multiple awards and the author is just amazing, is Hello Universe. And it was so good. And Erin Entrada Kelly, I think it won a Newbery Award. Her characters are so real and quirky. It is just a character study masterclass.
I always love the Newbery Award ones. They always pick good stuff.
They do. And then 2 other ones, and funny enough, they're both adult, but they are amazing, both pleasure-wise and craft-wise, is City of Brass by a fellow DV Pitt alum. And
I didn't know she was...
Shan,
awesome.
Shan signed in the
She's
first
amazing.
DV pitch. She was like one of the first to sign with like a 700-page book. And I'm like, how did anybody even read this quickly? But City of Brass, that whole trilogy is amazing.
It's
That's
amazing. I tore through that last year.
It's such a good way to do a trilogy. And so if you have any kind of series ambitions, the way she takes people who start out as villains and then kind of almost humanizes them, or at least gets you to understand their motivations and gets you to kind of almost switch your point of view on them. is amazing. She's just very, very good. And then even though it's fantasy, it's weirdly well researched because she's drawing from historical sources. And then Jade War. Fonda Lee's Jade City series. Jade War is probably the best sequel that I've ever read. It is probably even better than Jade City. What she manages to do so is based on this island, and this island has a very distinct culture that's inspired by Asian countries. And then she creates a diaspora and addresses immigrant culture in a way and how it's different from the island, the main source, in such a way that I've never seen. And I thought it was really incredible.
Nice. That's awesome. I love it. All right. And per usual, I'll always make sure for everyone listening that there are links to all these books. There'll be links to Meredith's website. There'll be links to all of her social media accounts. So if you're scrambling to write that down, don't worry, I got you. Okay, so as a writer, what are some recommendations for podcasts, blogs, any type of learning resources?
So DV Pit and DV Con, Beth has done an amazing job in creating these tremendous resources. We did the con, and that was my first panel, and I was talking about community, finding your social community. And then Dahlia Adler's site, she has been just a huge resource with her site and kind of badgering everybody else into updating their sites. So she's just great.
That's awesome. Okay, so I know that your background, you are not just a writer, you also have a law degree, correct?
I do.
So I'm going to ask you, if you couldn't be a writer, would you want to be a lawyer, or is there a second dream profession that you would want to do?
I still am a lawyer. So,
Sorry. All right. Let's take out writer and lawyer all together. If you couldn't be either of those, what would be your dream profession?
I actually might have been a chef.
Ooh. Do you do lots of cooking?
Yeah, Jasmine's love of cooking came from my love of cooking. So that was quite easy to write because it was just writing about what I love about cooking and fine dining.
Nice.
That's awesome.
That's wonderful.
For some reason, I had it in my head that you were like predominantly author more than lawyer, but you're kicking butt in both, it sounds like.
I am predominantly author. That's absolutely true. My firm allowed me to do was be extremely part-time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Wonderful. That's so wonderful.
All right.
Nice.
So I wanted to end with a question that we kind of asked all of our guests at the very end here. And it's the process of writing. All of us have different journeys and it's different for everyone. And so if you were to pick a metaphor to describe your personal writing journey, what would it be?
There's a meme and it's a possum and it's screaming in a garbage can. So probably that. I think it would be just word by word, step by step. There are no shortcuts. You just kind of have to keep going with it. So it would probably be like a little goat climbing up a hill that's pretty steep and treacherous.
That's fair. Step by step. I like that. All right. So everyone, make sure you go and check out Jasmine Project. Pick it up. It's totally worth it.
Yes.
I'm going to be waiting for the pre-order button for Everyone Hates Kelsey Miller.
Yes.
And make sure that you check out Meredith on Twitter. Give her a little hello and thank her for coming on Punch Keys. And thanks, Meredith. This has been awesome.
We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And if you liked this episode, please subscribe and give us that clickable 5-star love.
Got writer questions or feedback? Reach out through our website. And until next time, make sure to punch the keys.